Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grimwit with Dimwits. I'm T.
And I'm Blondie.
And how are you today, Miss Blondie?
I am well. And yourself?
I am well as well. That's a lot of wells.
As long as we're not trapped in them, we're okay.
And as long as we're not in a hotel room with Sean Combs, we're even better.
Oh, my gosh.
Have you seen that video?
Oh, my gosh. Yes, I did.
How wild is that? This guy has some bolas, let me tell you.
That was insane. And him to come back and say, oh, I'm disgusted. Oh, please.
Oh, there's no excuse for my behavior. I'm so disgusted. Yeah, we know. Tell us something we don't know. We already know.
He was vicious. I kept waiting for him to lose that towel.
Ugh. No, keep it on, please. No, he was vicious and he went after her. She was just trying to get out, and it's a control thing. He's an abuser. You can tell this isn't his first rodeo.
No, and even though he said he was intoxicated, he had no problem going up there and just whipping her down and kicking her.
Yep. And did you see at the end where he took a vase and threw something at her like glass?
Yeah. All she was trying to do was get away.
It's so sad. I mean, just right before this came out, he was talking about how enough is enough and no one's going to keep accusing me. I've never done anything, blah, 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 blah. And then here comes the proof. I freaking love when stuff like this happens to people like this.
And it kind of makes you wonder, would he be so disgusted and upset with himself? He couldn't believe it if it wasn't recorded?
No, it would have never happened.
Oh, I did like it when they settled out of court, but that wasn't him admitting that he did anything wrong.
Yeah, he just likes to give his hard-earned money away, because he's a nice guy.
I don't think we're going to see his picture in the dictionary under nice guy.
Yeah. What a disgusting human being. And I didn't have any feelings about him one way or the other. I'm not a fan. I don't dislike the guy. I mean, it's just disturbing, though, that this has become such a big deal. And he's been so proactive, in his own defense. Oh, poor me, he's the victim. And now some proof comes out and, oh, oops, my bad.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, you're sick. I'm just glad it happened. I really am.
And I'm glad it got caught. And then this was 8 years ago. So what has he done in this last 8 years before all this came out?
But no, he hasn't done anything. And he knew about this. We could go on and on. I'm just like, ugh. I just saw it and I was like, we got to talk about this because it's just so offensive.
Exactly.
I'm glad she's okay. I'm glad she's living her life. And I'm glad this has shed a lot of light on him and what he's capable of. And we'll see what happens in the future.
Right. And this actually falls in line with, you have no idea what people are capable of.
No, you don't. Money doesn't buy you class.
Doesn't buy you a lot of things.
Anyway, all right. We'll go from that dark side to another dark side. A different shade of dark. What are we doing today?
Well, this episode was actually suggested by a friend and avid listener named Daniel.
And you told me about Daniel, and I need to meet Daniel someday, apparently.
Yes, he really wants to meet you.
You're like, you are so setting yourself up for disappointment, Daniel. Just live the fantasy, never meet the real person.
I don't think that's going to sway him, though. I think he really wants to meet you.
All right. Well, I will meet Daniel someday. And thanks, Daniel, for this story. It actually sounds like a really good one.
It is. It's a little bit crazy, actually. It's very sad and really crazy.
Yeah.
So, okay. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So let's get our grim on.
All right. Let's do this.
So you know how doing all these things, we find that a majority of the killers or murderers are a product of their environment while growing up?
Yes.
I just wonder if their environment wasn't so bad, would they still become murderers? What makes them do the things they do?
I've wondered that myself because we've already discussed a few people that I think blame their families and how they grew up. And yet they didn't really have too much trauma in their background. So I didn't understand that.
I don't either. And this is the same thing with Combs. You never know what you get. You never know that other side of the person.
Right. Exactly.
So this story is about Rodney Alcala. He was born in San Antonio, Texas on August 23rd, 1943, and his birth name is Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Bucur, a.k.a. Rodney James Alcala.
Much better version.
And he was one of 3 children. Alcala's father moved the family to Mexico in 1951, but 3 years after they moved, he left and abandoned his family. And then at age 11, his mother picked the family up and moved them to Los Angeles. Rodney went to high school in Montebello and was considered gifted with an IQ of 135. Now, putting that into perspective, I've got a few different IQs. Queen Elizabeth was 125, Ted Bundy was 136, and Jeffrey Dahmer was around 145. 130 to 144 is considered moderately gifted. Your average person has about 100. Rodney was well liked. He was on the yearbook committee, and he was on the track and cross-country teams.
I know quite a few people who were considered gifted, and they were, but a lot of them were socially awkward. I don't know too many who truly had the best of both worlds, meaning, really book smart and socially not awkward.
Right. And I actually do know one person who's considered gifted, but he's so arrogant and manipulative. He has no compassion. He's very self-centered. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And just on a side note here, I looked up the IQ tests. I wanted to take them just out of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And you answered 10 questions, and I fell between 105 and 120. So I was pretty pleased with that.
Fixed.
I got 8 out of 10 correct.
I've never taken an IQ test.
Well, this was just like a little precursor test. If you wanted to find out more, you had to pay $9 and you have the big old long test and they give you more accurate IQ.
We don't want to know that bad. Not $9 worth.
No. I'll settle for 105 to 120. I'm good.
You're like, I want that more vague area because I don't really want it to be too accurate. I'm smarter than that.
Right. And do you know what I can buy with that $9?
Nothing.
That's not much, but I could buy something. So after graduation in 1961, at age 17, Rodney joined the U.S. Army at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He became a paratrooper and he also served as a clerk. During his service, it was put in his file that he was vindictive, manipulative, and insubordinate by his commanding officer. He was also disciplined on numerous occasions for assaulting women. Why he wasn't dishonorably discharged for that, I have no idea.
I wonder if the rules were different. Maybe it wasn't even a big deal to harass women during that time. Because, sadly, even the Me Too movement wasn't until 2006.
You're right, but it's sad. It just wasn't as frowned upon as it is today, I guess.
I think people just didn't want to deal with it.
Could be. 3 years later, in 1964, he had a nervous breakdown. He went AWOL and hitchhiked back to his mother's house in Monterey Park. Due to his nervous breakdown, he had to be evaluated by a military psychiatrist. The results showed that he had antisocial personality disorder, and because of the diagnosis, he was discharged on medical grounds. After his discharge, he attended UCLA School of Fine Arts and graduated. Then, strangely enough, he later studied under Roman Polanski at New York University, NYU. So far, this guy has had a full life on top of being considered a sexual deviant by the military.
And I find it interesting that he worked with Polanski because Polanski was arrested for sexual crimes as well. So I'm sure that they worked very good together.
That was his mentor.
Right?
Fast forward to September 25th, 1968. A man was driving down the street and saw a beige car with no license plates following a little girl. He watches to see what happens. The beige car pulls over and the man inside starts talking to the girl. She was on her way to school, and the man in the car asked her if she needed a ride. At first she said no, stranger danger. But then he told her he knew her parents and she got in. The Good Samaritan, still behind the beige car, starts to follow them. They end up at a Hollywood apartment. Not sure what the situation was, the Good Samaritan calls the police to come and check it out. I was thinking, at that time, they have to find a payphone before making the call. Today, It would have been recorded on the cell phone, on the dash cam, and the police would have been called on the way to the apartment. But then again, today, kids probably would have said, let me call my parents first because they have their own cell phones.
It's so different now. But it's nice to know that we're still good people in this world who stuck their necks
Alrighty.
their necks out when things didn't look right.
Officer Chris Camacho gets to the apartment and knocks on the door and says, I need to talk to you. A man comes to the door, and the officer remembers the man having an evil face. He tells the officer that he just got out of the shower and needs to get dressed. The officer gives him 10 seconds and bursts the door down. He walks in and sees something he will never forget. A small little body surrounded by a huge puddle of blood with her little Mary Jane shoes tossed to the side. He checks and she is not breathing. He runs through the apartment looking for the guy and he's gone. The man escaped through the back door. He walks back in the kitchen and miraculously the girl starts gagging and trying to breathe. She's alive. The officer notices that she may have been raped and also beaten with a metal bar. The girl was 8-year-old Tally Shapiro. She was in a coma for 32 days, and it took her months to recover, but she did survive.
Oh my gosh, that was really hard to hear, but thank goodness she survived.
Exactly. Searching the apartment, police found a UCLA picture ID of 25-year-old Rodney Alcala. He completely disappeared. Investigators started talking to UCLA students and professors that knew him. They learned that he was a model student and that no one knew he had a double life.
Those are the scariest ones.
I'll tell you what, I'm more on my toes and suspicious of people these days.
Oh, for sure. I was already pretty bad before, but I'm way worse now.
If we could only have eyes in the back of our heads, right?
Yep.
In the meantime, Alcala, trying to avoid police and arrest, moved to New York and started using the name John Berger. He then proceeded to get a job as a counselor at New Hampshire Arts Camp for Children. Really, children? He also worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, which in itself isn't a thing until you factor in that he worked in the same office as Richard Cottingham, a serial killer known as the Torso Killer and the Times Square Ripper. They didn't know about each other's dark side, at least at that time.
What are the chances of that? 2 killers in the same office.
In 1971, Alcala was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list and put on a poster in the post office. Remember when they used to have that when you walked in the post office and you saw these big pictures of, these fugitives? Although at the time 10 may have been a lot. Now I'm sure it's more than that, and it's online.
Yeah, so easily accessible. And I do remember those faces always look so sinister. But then I found out that my grandma made that list as well. Another story for another time.
What?
You know about my grandma.
We may have to make an episode of that.
Oh, God, wouldn't that be interesting?
An exclusive. So now it's the summer of 1971, and TWA flight attendant Cornelia Creeley, 23 years old, was moving into her new apartment on 83rd Street in Manhattan. She was approached by a man offering to help her move the heavy stuff. Of course she accepted. I wouldn't want to move a couch by myself either. She was found on June 12th, raped and murdered in her apartment. She was strangled with her own nylon stockings, and there were bite marks on her breast. She was held down while being strangled, and something was stuffed in her mouth to keep her from screaming. The police worked on the case, but there were no real leads, and at the time there was no forensic tools like we have today. In New York, in 1971, there were almost 2,000 killings. Cornelia Creeley's murder was left unsolved.
That is an extremely high number of killings in 1 year, because even nowadays, I don't believe it's anywhere near that. I want to say it's like in the hundreds.
In the 70s, wasn't there a big drug thing in New York and different gangs and things like that?
I don't know. It just seems like an awful lot of killings for 1 year, especially back then. But yeah, maybe there was something going on, some mob stuff, or
Right. That's where
I
my
don't
head
know.
went. My head went mob too.
You might be right.
A few months had passed, and two girls that attended the arts camp went to the post office. One of them looked up at the FBI 10 Most Wanted poster and said, "Oh my gosh, that's Mr. Berger." They ran back to the school and told the dean, who called the authorities, and Alcala was arrested. The FBI called the police in California to let them know that Alcala was arrested, that they had him and he was ready to be picked up. They were eager to charge him with Tally Shapiro's vicious assault and attempted murder, but there was one problem. Tally's family moved out of the country to get away from the awful experience and didn't want her to relive it and testify. Since there was no primary witness, prosecutors didn't charge Alcala with rape and attempted murder. Instead, the charge was child molestation. He was convicted and sentenced to 34 months for what he did to poor Tally. Alcala was paroled in 1974 after serving 17 months. They said he was a model prisoner. I say he's a great actor.
That is so crazy that he's even given credit for being a model prisoner, because he was also a model student when he tried to kill that little girl. Doesn't the parole board know about this stuff before they make their decisions?
Well, I would assume so, but he was convicted of child molestation and not the attempted murder. You would hope that they would know.
Yeah, just because he got away with the attempted murder doesn't mean it didn't happen.
True.
It should still be in a record somewhere.
But if he wasn't charged, I don't know how the system works, but if he wasn't charged for that.
Yeah, I guess it goes away.
After his release, less than 2 months later, he was arrested again for assaulting a 13-year-old girl. He offered her a ride to school and abducted her. He served 2 years and was paroled again in 1976.
He only served 2 years, and this is only 5 years from when he abducted Tally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's still a model prisoner, and maybe that's because there are no little girls in prison for him to rape and murder.
So now it's 1977, and Alcala had been in jail twice for assaulting young girls. He's still on parole, a known flight risk, and repeat offender. But his LA parole officer permitted him to travel back to New York. This I don't understand.
He probably tried to make it their problem, not ours.
Maybe.
Pretty disgusting.
Maybe. On July 15th, 1977, about a week after Alcala returned to New York, a missing persons report was made on 23-year-old Ellen Jane Hover, who was an artist and musician. The last time that anyone saw her, she was in her apartment. Looking for clues of what may have happened to her, police searched her apartment and found her date book that had one appointment on the day she disappeared with John Berger. In late 1977, the FBI got a tip about Alcala, stating that police had arrested him years before in the Shapiro case. Police went to question him, and he admitted to knowing Ellen, but they couldn't arrest him because there was no body.
You know, that whole no body thing has set so many killers free. If you're capable of concealing a body, you can just be free forever and continue killing.
I agree, but now I think you can be convicted if there's other evidence, which then the technology wasn't there to find it.
I think you're right. I think those cases are few and far between, but I do think you're right.
Ellen's body was not found until a year later. She was buried under some large rocks on the grounds of Phelps Memorial Hospital in Westchester, near the Rockefeller estate. Her body was so decomposed that they had to identify her with dental records. After the autopsy, they declared it a homicide. So was the person in her date book the last person she saw? Could John Berger have been the one that killed her? Interesting fact about her. She was the daughter of famed nightclub owner Herman Hover. He bought a nightclub on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood, turned it around to be a hotspot for celebrities. She was also the goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr.
Wow, that's really interesting. I wonder how he connected with someone like her.
In 1977, the New York streets were being terrorized by crime and killings during this time. The police were dealing with a serial killer called the Son of Sam. After being questioned by police about Ellen Hover, Alcala took a road trip back to California. Also on a road trip was Christine Ruth Thornton, 29, and her boyfriend from Texas. Christine and her boyfriend were heading west to Montana to pan for gold. Christine was a free spirit and always up for adventure. She was even happier than usual because she found out she was pregnant and called her mom with the happy news. That was the last time her family heard from her. Her sister Kathy feared the worst. Even though she was happy about her exciting news, Christine and her boyfriend had a turbulent relationship. Kathy was afraid he had something to do with her disappearance, and she would spend the next 39 years looking for her sister. As 1977 is coming to an end, the body of 18-year-old Jill Barcombe was found on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles on November 9th. She was found in the fetal position with no clothes from the waist down. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled with rope ties, beaten, and 3 bite marks were on her right breast. Authorities believe she may have been murdered by the Hillside Strangler. And the 70s was crazy for killers.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Oh, these poor people. But the year isn't over yet, at least for killings. On December 16, 1977, Georgia Wickstead was found dead in her Malibu apartment. The night before, she had gone out to a bar with a fellow nurse and friend to relax and have a drink. Georgia drove her friend back to her house, then headed home. That was the last time she was seen alive. The next day, she didn't show up for work. Her co-workers reported her missing. Police went to Georgia's apartment to check on her and saw that there were signs of forced entry. Walking into her bedroom, they found her on the floor, posed. She was naked and had been strangled with her nylons. Georgia was sexually assaulted, her genitals were mutilated, and her head had been bashed in. There were no suspects, no clues. The police had their work cut out for them.
The violence and his cockiness seems to have really escalated.
He's got that arrogant, no one can touch me thing happening.
Yeah, he's starting to pose people now and, busting in through doors.
And I'm thinking all the posing might have to do with his photography.
You might be right. I didn't even think about that.
Mm-hmm. It's New Year, and Rodney Alcala is back in Los Angeles and working as a typesetter for the Los Angeles Times. He also took photographs for weddings, etc. And one of his co-workers remembered Alcala showing her some of his photographs. She was young and naive, and even though she thought some of these pictures were weird, she still posed for him. His portfolio included photographs of young women and men. A lot of them were naked and posed in sexually explicit positions. She asked him why he took these pictures. He had her convinced that their moms asked them to.
Their moms? And she believed him? I mean, come on. I wonder what her IQ was.
In her early 20s, maybe 75?
I'm not reading 75. Your mom asked me to do this. Go ahead and do it. It's okay. Come on.
Let's not forget that he's a registered sex offender. Because he was registered and living in Los Angeles, he was questioned by the Hillside Strangler Task Force to see if he could possibly be the Hillside Strangler. The police were trying to cover all their bases, but Alcala was ruled out because he had been arrested for marijuana possession and served a brief sentence in jail. So we know the LA Times didn't run a background check on Alcala. It was apparent that neither did this show, The Dating Game. Alcala applied to be a bachelor on the show and was picked. He said his profession was successful photographer, and that when he wasn't working, he could be found skydiving and motorcycling. I watched the YouTube clip of this show that aired in September 1978. The link will be posted in this episode's description or in the comments section of our Facebook page. But let me tell you, he did give me the eerie vibes.
I used to love that show. I thought everybody ended up married and happily ever after.
Yeah, I did too. Off camera, one of the bachelors, Jed Mills, said about Alcala, quote, "He became very unlikable and rude, and imposing as though he was trying to intimidate. I wound up not liking this guy, not wanting to be near him. He got creepier and more negative. He was a standout creepy guy in my life. End quote.
Well, that guy really knows how to read people.
More than he knew.
Right?
During the questions, the bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, asked Alcala what he would be if she could serve him as a meal. Alcala replied, quote, "I'm called a banana, and I look really good." End quote. Do you think I sounded like him?
I don't know what he sounds like.
She asked him to elaborate, and he said, quote, "Peel me." End quote. Okay, that's just gross.
If he thought that was a sexy answer, he is way off the mark.
I don't even know if he can see the mark at that point. It came time to choose the bachelor, and Cheryl says, "I like bananas. I'll take number 1. Okay, double gross.
Are you kidding me? She should have peeled the hell out of there. What was wrong with this girl?
Okay, dad joke.
I got to get him in when I can.
But after they had a chance to talk and get to know each other, Cheryl contacted the show and refused to go on the date because she found Alcala creepy. I'm pretty sure that saved her from something bad happening to her.
That's just bananas.
Did you have that in your back pocket too?
It was there. It was just waiting.
The next year seemed to be filled with assaults, attacks, and murders. But with all the efforts of the police, some of these went unsolved. On June 24, 1978, Charlotte Lee Lamb, 31, was found dead in her El Segundo apartment complex's laundry room. She was found posed with her hands tied behind her back. Charlotte was beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled with a shoelace. A year later, June 13, 1979, 21-year-old Jill Marie Parento, a computer key punch operator, was excited to go to a baseball game and left early from work. But the next morning, she didn't show up for work, so the police were called to check on her. They arrived at her apartment in Burbank to find the door forced open. Jill was posed on her bathroom floor with pillows under her shoulders. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Just a week later, on June 20th, Robin Samso, 12 years old, was going to start a new job answering phones in exchange for lessons at her dance studio. She had some time before she had to be at work, so Robin and her friend Bridget went to Huntington Beach to play for a couple hours in the sand. After playing for a while, a man with dark hair approaches them and asks if he can take their pictures. Robin says, "Sure." Then, out of nowhere, Bridget's neighbor walks up to them and asks if everything is okay. The man grabs his camera, turns his head away, and disappears. Robin realized she needed to get to work, so she borrowed her friend's bike and took off. The dance studio called Robin's mother because she never arrived. 12 days later, while a fire crew was doing fire prevention maintenance, they found the remains of Robin. She had been raped, beaten, and stabbed with a knife. During the search for Robin, her friend Bridget told the police about the man that approached them, wanting to take their picture. Bridget worked with a sketch artist, which resulted in a composite sketch. The sketch was released all over the media in Southern California. And by chance, Alcala's parole officer saw the media coverage, called detectives, and told them, "Hey, you need to look at this guy named Rodney Alcala."
So wait a minute. He approached the girls, and then he was scared away by a neighbor. And then when the girls separated, one of them still came up missing?
Yeah, she took off on her friend Bridget's bike and got taken somewhere between the beach and the dance studio where she was going to start working.
So he must have just sat and waited for an opportunity. Oh my gosh.
And I actually read somewhere that that's what predators do. I mean, obviously, they just sit and wait and watch.
Oh, so disturbing.
Alcala was the man that 11 years earlier attacked 8-year-old Tally Shapiro and left her for dead. He currently lives with his mother in Monterey Park, not too far from where Robin was found. Police learned that he had no alibi or anyone that could account for his whereabouts when Robin went missing. On July 24, 1979, Rodney Alcala was arrested and charged with the assault and murder of Robin Samso. He was held without bail.
So did the neighbor or the other girl identify him, or what happened?
Other than Bridget giving the information for the sketch, not that I know of that anybody went to the police station and identified him. And I don't know if the neighbor actually really saw his face because he turned away as soon as the neighbor got there.
Huh, that's interesting. I mean, because at least the girl could have been like, yeah, that's the guy. Just put her in front of him.
True. And I don't know. It may have happened. I didn't find any information about that.
Okay.
While locked up in jail, Alcala's sister came to visit him, and they didn't realize that the conversation was recorded. He told his sister that he had a storage locker in Seattle, Washington, and asked her to do him a big favor and clear it out before the cops found out about it. But here's one for the good guys. They had searched Alcala's home and found a receipt for the storage locker, and they had already gotten everything out of there. Hundreds of pictures were found of men and women, a lot posed in provocative positions and or naked. Among all these photographs was a small little silk bag with earrings in it. Alcala said they were his. Police showed the earrings to Robin Samso's mother, and she recognized them. They were her earrings that Robin used to love to borrow.
Okay, so I'm just trying to wrap my skull around this. Had the sister agreed to dump all that evidence on the recorded conversation? Because that would be super sketchy on her part.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure, but the way they made it sound, she might have.
Jeez, it's like evil runs in the family.
Almost a year later, in February 1980, Rodney Alcala went on trial for the murder of Robin Samso. The trial took 2.5 months with almost 50 witnesses. In May 1980, Alcala was found guilty and sentenced to the death penalty. Yay, justice is served. Or is it? The California Supreme Court overturned the verdict in 1984 based on the fact that Alcala didn't receive a fair trial because the jury was improperly informed of his prior sexual crimes. Now, this whole statement just gets me. So, fair trial, really? The man killed a little girl. Improperly informed of his prior sex crimes? Is there a way to improperly inform a jury that this man is a sexual deviant murderer?
Yeah, it's not like he was just arrested and someone thought he was capable of this stuff. He was actually found guilty and convicted of those prior sex crimes. So why shouldn't the jury know about it? The way we protect convicted criminals in this country is astounding.
Sometimes their rights kind of outweigh the victims, it seems like.
Well, they always do. Most of the victims are dead.
Robin's mother was devastated, and one comment that kind of resonated with me was, "The little stone, the ripples keep going. There's victims and victims and victims." It's so true. One little thing causes a reaction that ripples through, not only to the victim, but the families now become victims.
That always happens. It's so sad.
It took 6 years for Rodney Alcala to have his second trial. In May 1986, they basically had the same trial as the first, with the exception of the prior criminal record situation that messed up the first one. Once again, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Alcala appealed his conviction again, but in 1992, the California Supreme Court upheld his conviction. But he wasn't done. In 2001, he filed a federal habeas corpus petition. And I looked this up. A habeas corpus petition in California allows you to challenge your conviction or sentencing. You can file it only after exhausting all criminal appeals. And the petition must show your detention violates the law or your constitutional rights.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sometimes you just what can you say?
Right. So 22 years after Robin was killed, the United States District Court granted it and overturned his second conviction. The basis was that he wasn't able to present some evidence.
Oh, keep going.
Fortunately, though, it's not over. While preparing for the third trial, new evidence comes to light under a new state law. DNA evidence, including semen. Alcala objects. I'm shocked.
Oh, yeah, me too. I love when DNA evidence came to light. It's like, yes, nobody can argue with it.
Right. And it's so many years later, I'm glad that they had the evidence to test. Right.
Yeah, good police work on their part.
Right. The DNA evidence that was presented is 4. I'm going to give you a list of this. Jill Barcombe, the 18-year-old that was found in the fetal position on the dirt path in 1977, they said it was DNA evidence, but they didn't list anything exactly. My guess is it would be the saliva found on the breast that he left bite marks on.
Was there ever any semen that you know of?
I would assume, because they're saying DNA evidence, so when they say that, I would assume because he raped these women, that they had gotten that evidence and they'd saved it.
Okay. That's what I assumed this whole time, but go ahead.
Yeah. Georgia Wickstead, who in 1977 was bludgeoned in her Malibu apartment, they found Alcala's DNA and handprint. Charlotte Lamb, she was raped and strangled in 1978 and left in the laundry room of her El Segundo apartment complex. There was an additional pair of earrings in that little silk bag that was found in his storage locker. They had Charlotte's DNA on them.
Wow.
Jill Parento, the key punch operator that went to the baseball game in 1979, she was left beaten, strangled, and posed on her bathroom floor in her Burbank apartment. The killer climbed out a window and cut himself. The blood matched Alcala.
How much more do we need?
Not much. As a side note about this arrogant, insane man, while he was in jail with nothing but time on his hands, between his second and third trials, he wrote a book called You the Jury and self-published it. Also, he filed 2 lawsuits against the California penal system, one for a slip and fall incident, and the second was because they refused to provide him a low-fat diet. I don't understand how he could still have any rights to do that. I mean, I would get it if it had to do with his case, but these are completely separate.
So ridiculous what we do in this country. Really.
In 2003, a motion was entered by prosecution to join the 4 newly discovered victims to the charges already in place for Robin Samsoe. Shocked and surprised, Alcala's attorneys objected to the motion, one of them even arguing with this. I can't believe this, but here we go. Quote, "If you're a juror and you hear one murder case, you may be able to have reasonable doubt. But it's very hard to say you have reasonable doubt on all 5, especially when 4 of the 5 aren't alleged by eyewitnesses, but are proven by DNA matches." End quote. Is that even an argument or just a fact?
He just made it worse for his client. But these defense attorneys that are trying to save these animals and making themselves look stupid in the process and trying to keep them free to keep killing should be asked to keep them, in their own homes with their own daughters during these retrials. And let's see who believes in him now.
Right?
Yeah. Let's see. How much do you believe in this guy? Take him home with you.
The California Supreme Court in 2006 ruled in the prosecution's favor, and Alcala would stand trial on all 5 charges. Let's hope the third time's the charm. In February 2010, Alcala was on trial for the 3rd time. He acted as his own attorney, which cracked me up because I kind of figure his other attorneys are going, "Dude, sorry, you did it, you're on your own."
Finally.
During the trial, he acted better than everyone. His questions and answers to himself made him look completely unhinged. He took the stand in his own defense and played both the roles as witness and interrogator. He changed his voice while asking questions to appear like there was 2 people. This witness-interrogator process took 5 hours. One of his supposed alibis during Robin Samsoe's disappearance was that at the time she was taken, he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a photographer job.
This guy's nuts. But, I will say I would have been mesmerized watching him play 2 people. It kind of reminds me of, have you seen the people that wear like half an outfit as a woman and half an outfit as a...
I do.
And he's just like flipping around talking to himself. But he's doing this for real. Like, this is not a joke. So this guy's a total nut job.
And you should see pictures of him while he's doing this or this trial. He has long hair. He had it grown out, probably shoulder length, and it's all gray. So the possessed character, I'm sure, was like playing the part right there.
Wow. That must have really been something to see.
But one of the most heartbreaking things he did was to call Robin Samsoe's mother to the stand to try and impeach her character. He questioned her about what happened during the first trial. He asked her if she brought a gun into the courtroom. She said she did, and that she was going to shoot him right between the eyes if she could have gotten a shot at him. She said she put her hand in her purse to get the gun, but felt Robin's presence and smelled her shampoo. That she felt the warmth on her hand, which kept her from pulling her hand out of her purse. I'm telling you, every time I hear that, I just get teary-eyed.
I don't blame you. That just breaks my heart. I mean, to have the gun there, wow.
And that shows you how our courts have changed as well, because now you couldn't get it through a metal detector.
No, you couldn't.
During Alcala's closing arguments, he didn't dispute killing the other 4 women, other than to say he didn't remember killing them. He did say, though, quote, "Let me put the death penalty in perspective for you. If you desire to join in the killing of a human being, you and the families will have to wait at least 15 to 20 years while the case slowly churns through the appellate process." End quote. Then he played an Arlo Guthrie song called Alice's Restaurant, which has lyrics talking about killing people. I don't know how he thought that was going to sway the jury, because it just made him look worse.
And I can't believe he had the nerve to say, if you desired to join in the killing of a human being. What an idiot. I mean, is this supposed to make them feel guilty for righting a wrong?
He's just that dementedly arrogant.
This is sheer cockiness.
For a 3rd time, Rodney Alcala is found guilty of murder in the 1st degree of Robin Samso. The penalty phase was separate, and during this phase, prosecution called a surprise witness. She sits down and says, quote, "My name is Tally Shapiro. I am one of Rodney Alcala's first victims and one of the only living victims. It should have stopped with me. Why in the world are there so many other victims when it was known for a fact what he did to me?" End quote. This was 42 years after she was attacked. Alcala was sentenced to death again.
That is a made-for-TV moment. I got chills when you were saying that.
It's seriously sometimes, not that it's better, but you can't write this.
No, this is definitely more effective. I did not see that coming.
No.
Good for her.
Alcala's time on trial wasn't over, though. Now that he was tried and convicted in California, New York wanted their turn. DNA evidence not only helped authorities in California, but also in New York. So in January 2011, a grand jury in Manhattan indicted Alcala for the 1971 murder of flight attendant Cornelia Crilly, who was moving into her apartment and was murdered. And also for Ellen Hover, who went missing in 1977 and was found dead under rocks by the Rockefeller estate. In June 2012, 69-year-old Rodney Alcala was extradited to New York to stand trial. He initially pled not guilty. However, in December 2012, he changed his plea to guilty, saying he wanted to get back to California so he could start another appeal. Because of the plea change, in January 2013, he was given an additional 25 years to life. He wasn't given the death penalty because New York had not had the death penalty option since 2007. He was returned to San Quentin's death row.
Well, we know he was partying there because all those guys got let go and were taken to a more kinder and gentler prison.
Well, we don't want them to suffer.
No, of course we don't. My goodness. You don't want to treat them inhumanely. Insert sarcasm here.
I don't think it needs to be inserted. I think it's kind of implied.
Right.
Kathy, Christine Thornton's sister, still continues to search for Christine, who went to pan for gold with her boyfriend. But one night in 2013, Kathy's son was watching 48 Hours, The Killing Game, which led him to a website with a collection of photos that Alcala had taken. The photos were posted in an effort to help identify people in his pictures. Kathy's son gave the information to his mother, and sure enough, she thought she recognized Christine. It was confirmed when she saw a picture of her little toe that was very distinct. Still wanting to know what happened, Kathy submitted her DNA to the National Database of Missing Persons, just in case Christine's DNA may be in the system. In nothing short of a miracle, and over 30 years later in Wyoming, investigators were working on a cold case of a body found in 1982. Originally, everything was done to try and figure out who it was, but all they knew for sure was the body was a 25 to 35-year-old female who was approximately 6 months pregnant. They had clothing, bones, and an intact skull. Detective Schumann, not one of the original investigators, took over looking at the cold case files and realized the lab saved skin tissue and bone fragments. They were submitted to the proper authorities for DNA testing, and less than a year later, they had a match on her mother's side to her sister. After almost 40 years of searching, Kathy found her sister, Christine.
Geez, these poor families.
And they're stopping at nothing.
Absolutely not. I wouldn't stop either.
More details of what happened unraveled. In the summer of 1977, Christine and her boyfriend had broken up in Biloxi, Mississippi, and she was last seen hitchhiking. The picture taken by Alcala was a happy Christine on a motorcycle wearing a yellow shirt. She probably had no clue of what he was capable of. There were over 1,000 photos that were found in Alcala's storage unit. Only 120 were released. The rest could not be shown because they were sexually explicit. Weeks after they were released, authorities said about 21 women came forward to identify themselves. Plus, at least 6 families recognized loved ones who had disappeared years ago but were never found. Police are always hoping further identifications will be made. The photos remain online, and a link will be posted in our description and in our Facebook comments section of this episode. A source that I know talked to Alcala while he was incarcerated and called him intelligent, arrogant, and manipulative. Rodney Alcala is without a doubt linked to 8 murders. The true number of people he's attacked, assaulted, and murdered is unknown and may never be known. It is believed it could be as high as 130. Rodney Alcala died at age 77 in Cochran, California, of natural causes. He spent 42 years in prison.
This makes me so angry that he was allowed to live out his full and natural life with taxpayers picking up the bill, of course. He should have been disgraced and discarded, just like his victims.
He should have had a lot of things done to him, but, they have rights.
Oh, sometimes it's so hard to hear how these cases end.
I know.
There's no justice.
You're somewhere in between feeling sad, feeling angry, frustrated. You want to hug a family member. I mean, you got all the feels happening.
Well, thanks a lot, Daniel. It was a very interesting story and a lot of details. And I know who you're talking about, but I didn't know any details about him at all. I couldn't even have told you one person that he was accused of killing, but I did know the name. Mm-hmm. So this was very interesting for me.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to take care, have fun, and let your grimaginations run wild. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
We just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. And if you'd like to send in your creepy little grim bits, we would love to hear your personal stories, interests, and suggestions. Please email them to grimwitwithdimwits@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at grimwitwithdimwits, Twitter at grimwitwithdimwits, and Facebook, Grimwit with Dimwits. Join us every Monday for new episodes, and feel free to share us with your grim-loving friends.
We would really appreciate if you would take a minute to rate and review. 5-star ratings go a long way and would really help us out. Until then, we would love it if you'd come back next week to delve with us into the strange and unusual things we just can't wrap our skulls around.